Thank you, Tasha. Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and redeemer. Once at a large high school, a gregarious young girl made it her goal to meet at least one new person every day at lunch. One day that year, she met another student, Mike, whom she later described as a loner. Mike was shy, awkward, and uncomfortable with social interactions, and because of that, Maria, the girl, had chosen not to invite him to sit with her at her lunch table. But every day thereafter, for the next 2 years or so, she said hello to him at the cafeteria with a smile or a wave. One day, she noticed that Mike had been absent for several weeks. Mike, for his part, knew that he was a misfit. No one, not even this pleasant Maria, wanted to include him in their circle. He knew he did not fit in, and he felt like he did not deserve to live anymore. He felt that even his family didn't notice if he came home or not. And he began to believe that the world would be a better place without him. And so one day, he swallowed half a bottle of sleeping pills. The great actor Robin Williams once said, "I used to think that the worst thing in life is to end up alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people who make you feel all alone." And so to our text. Jesus has just finished preaching perhaps the most well-known and highly influential sermons of all times. We Christians call it the Sermon on the Mount, and ever since Jesus spoke it, it has been a source of upheaval in the world. If we are to follow Matthew's narratival logic, having finished his great sermon, Jesus descends this mountain to show what the sermon would look like when it is lived. The first episode Matthew recounts for the reader is Jesus' encounter with a man afflicted with leprosy. In order to understand this incident, we need to do three things. First, we need to understand the stigma associated with leprosy. Second, we need to set straight a common line of argument from recent decades, not because it is wrong, but because it actually works against what Jesus does in the passage. And third, we need to understand what Matthew intends for us to grasp from Jesus' words to the man he had just healed. Leprosy in the Bible is some sort of a skin condition. We do not know what it was. We do not know if it was contagious or not. A person afflicted with this condition was declared to be ceremonially unclean. Such a person was supposed to live outside the city in a camp that was made specially for them, avoiding contact with anyone who was clean. Such a person could not eat from the same vessels as the clean people. And if this person happened to be walking on any road, they had to announce their uncleanness by repeatedly saying, "Unclean, unclean." Until the condition had healed itself, the person had to live a socially segregated life. The stigma surrounding leprosy was so all-encompassing that it was considered by the Jewish people to be the sign of the stain of sin, as the disease spread slowly across this person's skin to cover his entire body. If you recall, I have just said that we don't know what leprosy was or if it was contagious or not. However, the way the disease would spread over the skin contributed to the idea that it was highly contagious, just like sin was. And since the wages of sin is death, a leper was considered to be a mobile corpse, carrying in his body the decay of sin and the threat of death. Modern approaches to the passages in the Bible about leprosy often try to insist that what the Bible calls leprosy is not what we called leprosy till a few decades ago, and that is now properly called Hansen's disease. The problem with such approaches is that they're tackling the wrong problem. Remember, we don't even know if biblical leprosy was contagious. So an argument based on the fact that Hansen's disease is not contagious actually gets us nowhere. It's tackling the wrong problem. The point is not whether Jesus could have contracted the disease when he touched the leper. Rather, the point is that Jesus by touching the leper, overturned centuries of mandated exclusion and rehabilitated the man. From the incident that follows concerning the centurion servant, we know that Jesus did not even need to be in the same place as a person in order to heal that person. He could simply have spoken the words to the leper and the leper would have been healed. However, what he did was touch this untouchable. By healing the leper with a touch, Jesus demonstrated in real life the great divine inclusiveness he had spoken of in his great sermon. He had descended the mountain in order to move from exclusion to embrace. Having healed the man, Jesus tells him to go to the priest and offer a thanksgiving gift. This was so that the priest could examine him and declare him to be clean once more, allowing him once more to be included within society. By insisting that the healed man went to the priest, Jesus told him and tells us that true healing has not just a physical dimension. Rather, true healing touches our emotional, communal, and spiritual dimensions as well, and all of these need to be addressed. Now, Matthew does not tell us what happened to the former leper. We are, of course, expected to conclude that he did go to the priest, and the priest did proclaim that he is clean, and that he was then restored to his rightful place in society and to his family. But if we place ourselves among those who were with Jesus, walking along with him, we would be unsure. The people there would not have known what had happened. The observer there, would have been able to see that the man's skin was no longer, at least no longer looked diseased. But did that mean that the man was truly healed, or had Jesus worked some sort of magic to fool them? Only a priest would be able to tell. But right then and there, the observer would have had no way of coming to a firm conclusion. All this observer would have been able to conclude was what her eyes had seen. Jesus had intentionally touched this unclean leper, and according to the Torah, this rendered him unclean for the rest of the day. Along comes the centurion. Now, this is a Gentile. Most first century Jews would have considered him outside God's blessings. Not quite the outcast that the leper was, the Gentile centurion was nevertheless an outsider. He was not a part of God's covenant people, and he was a part of the occupying forces that then oppressed God's people daily. And here he was asking for a miracle, not for himself or for a member of his family, but for his servant. What would this now ceremonially unclean Jesus do? Would he deign to visit the unclean Gentile's house? Jesus offers to do that. But then the centurion speaks of authority. A person who had authority just needed to issue the command and it would be followed. That's his logic. In other words, if Jesus had authority, which the centurion believes that he had, then he did not have to be anywhere, in close proximity to this paralyzed servant. He just could pronounce the healing and it would happen. And if he didn't have authority, which the centurion does not believe, then no proximity to the servant would have been of any use. So it's a question of authority. If you have the authority, location doesn't matter. That's the centurion's logic. Jesus declares that the centurion had clearly identified the problem, the nature of the problem, one of authority. Our observer now there listens to this and begins to look back on this incident with what she had seen, the incident with the leper. The man's skin seemed to have been healed. Did Jesus have the authority to heal? Did he have the authority to heal even this dreadful disease of leprosy that symbolized human depravity and sinfulness and demonstrated that sin led to death? The observer would have had many such questions. However, her questions would not have been answered then and there. In order to do that, she would have had to conduct some research on her own, go to the temple, go to the priest, and determine if the leper had indeed been healed. And then also determine if the centurion's servant had been healed. She would have had to do all of that. Matthew, of course, spares us this effort, tells us directly that the centurion's servant was healed the very moment that Jesus pronounced healing. So, if the observer asked us, if we were now there to tell her, we would be able to tell her that the centurion's servant was healed. And this would mean that Jesus had not become unclean and lost his authority when he touched the leper. But in the middle, Jesus says something to his audience that would have been unsettling. So here they were, these Jews, comfortable with excluding the Gentiles and having no problems with refraining from having any contact with the leper. But now the leper had been made whole, and the centurion had demonstrated a kind of faith that Jesus declared that he had not seen anywhere else. This outsider, this Gentile, had shown a kind of understanding of authority and grasp of faith that God would have expected from his own chosen people. However, his chosen people had focused on drawing lines of separation, distinguishing themselves from others, and rather than being channels of blessings to everyone, which would have been true to their calling. Over the centuries, God's people had become more focused on excluding people than on being means through which God would show his embrace. And Jesus says clearly then that this failure to recognize how God works would mean that some who thought they were insiders would be shocked to find themselves on the outside. Those who found security in the lines that they were drawing would unceremoniously find themselves on the wrong side of the very lines that they had drawn. Just recently, we had a supreme demonstration of this kind of exclusion when our Honorable Prime Minister wanted to present a visiting president with a portrait of India that excluded those who did not showcase the whitewashed India he wanted everyone to see. Of course, the visiting president himself has some pedigree when it comes to supporting walls. Anyway, that's a different thing. Unfortunately, both of them have support for their endeavors of exclusion. The visiting president, of course, from some who would call themselves Christian. But perhaps we need to be reminded of Pope Francis's words, builders of walls, be they made of razor wire or bricks, will end up becoming prisoners of the walls they build. Walls, be they physical ones like bricks, made of bricks or razor wire as referred to by Pope Francis, or ideological ones as evidenced in today's passage, have always been not the symbol of human strength as is often advertised, but of human fear. And if it is true that perfect love casts out fear, then our building and maintaining of these symbols of fear is the evidence of our inability to love. In the leper and the centurion, we have examples of an insider and an outsider, both of whom were excluded. Both of them had physical signs of their exclusion. The leper, his diseased skin, and the centurion, his foreskin. Today, we may not rely on such physical signs to exclude, but lest we think that we are better than the Jews of Jesus' day, we need to remind ourselves of different invisible and intangible signs we use to exclude others. Over the years, the church has split over matters of doctrine and practice and polity. Now, what we believe, how we behave, and how we are structured have become the new lines that demarcate those who are included and those who are excluded. Take the single case of communion. What is happening at the Lord's table? How do we participate at the Lord's table? And who is permitted to officiate at the Lord's table? Three simple questions about one aspect of the Christian life, and the church has split numerously over the answers to all three. And that's because we use our own experiences as the plumb line by which we measure the experiences of others. We permit our limited and narrow perspective to be the rule by which we limit and narrow the mercy and grace of God that is otherwise limitless and wide. For there is a wideness in God's mercy that we need to recognize. There is a boundlessness to his acceptance. And if we insist on using our own experiences to measure those of others, we will resolutely refuse to move, as God surely wants us to move from exclusion to embrace. Mike was sinking. He realized then that he had swallowed enough sleeping pills to kill him. But as he sunk, he remembered how Maria smiled at him. While she never invited him to sit at her table, she at least affirmed his presence with a smile. There was one person who broke into a smile when she saw him. He was not nobody. He was someone who gave occasion for recognition and a smile. And so he reached for his phone and dialed the emergency number. Some days later, Maria read a post on Mike's Facebook wall. It was addressed to her. He narrated how he had taken the pills and wrote, "I thought I would be better off gone, so I took as many sleeping pills as I could. Before I started drifting away, I thought of you waving to me and giving me a smile. I called 911, thought you should know why I was out of school. Thank you for your smiles." All Maria did was say hello in the cafeteria and flash a smile every time she saw Mike. Those quick smiles gave him hope that not everyone wanted him gone and helped to ease the pain of being ostracized. We who are called to be Jesus' hands and feet and lips in this world have something much more than what Maria had. We can surely say hello and flash a smile every so often, but we can also invite others to our table. And we can tell others the greatest story ever told, the story of God's immense love, which manifested itself fully and finally when Jesus showed us that God's deepest desire is to show us and then to inspire us to show others how to move from exclusion to embrace.